Thank you everyone for joining us for Fire Safe Landscaping with Jessamine Heiss from Fire Safe Marin. We're really excited to have her here. And Jessamine, I look forward to your presentation. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jen, and thanks for sharing those events. They sounded really fun, especially the planting parties. I'll have to check that out. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for spending your Saturday morning here. A little bit about me. I'm born and raised in the Bay Area, and I was a defensible space inspector for Marin County Fire Department for about 3 years before getting my degree in environmental science and coming to work for Fire Safe Marin. So I predominantly have a lot of experience walking into people's yards and talking to them about their landscaping and fire safety. So that's what we're going to talk about today. The first section is going to cover understanding wildland fire behavior. I'm just going to touch on this briefly because there's a lot of resources online, and if you're looking to kind of dive more into it, feel free to send me an email later. I've left my email here on this page, but I'm sure Jen can get it to you if you reach out. We're going to talk about defensible space zones. I know it's sort of been a buzzword these days. If you live in the Bay Area, it might be kind of in the news or talked about locally between your fire departments. I just want to say that we're going to be talking about the very best practices that you can do today. This is from research, like decades old research about what homes and landscaping should look like in order to be saved from wildfire. It might look a little extreme. Just know that no one in this class, not myself nor Jen, are trying to enforce these rules. We are just trying to inform you on what is the best practice. So fire smart landscaping is kind of keeping those practices in mind to have a attractive yet fire resilient garden around your home. We'll touch on mulch, which I know is a hot topic, as well as plant choices. So it's Wildfire Awareness Month, month of May. Hardening homes from ember and flames is a huge part of what you can do to prepare for fire. We're going to talk just very briefly on what that is, which means the construction of your home. That's the vents that are your foundation vents, your eave vents. Those are could be an entryway for an ember. And defensible space is sort of from your home moving out. So any plantings that you have beside your home, shrubbery, roses, trees even, those could all potentially impact how your home ignites from a wildfire. And when we think about wildfire moving, it's really those ember casts from a fire that could be miles away. The embers are going to land. They could land in your garden. They could hit the wall of your home and land at the base of that wall. And those are the ignition points that are going to potentially ignite your home on fire. So we do worry about where those ember lands and what pathway they have to lead to your home. When a home ignites, it becomes a much larger fire. We all have seen it. A larger fire is harder to extinguish from fire suppression. A larger fire produces more embers, cascading embers to the rest of the neighborhood, causing a larger fire like what we've heard recently from out of LA, like an urban conflagration. So as we think about wildfire preparedness, we think about our homes, we think about our yards, and then of course you want to have an evacuation plan for yourself and your household, because kind of all of those things together are going to protect you and give you peace of mind in the event that there is a wildfire in your neighborhood. So as I was saying, those embers are the culprit, the really tricky things that people may not be thinking about when they're thinking about wildfire preparedness. This video is going to demonstrate sort of what that looks like. On the left, just on this little shot, you're going to see a house engulfed in flames. This is a traditionally built home made of wood. It has shrubs and bark mulch at the base of the siding, and it has a wooden fence. On the other side, we see what is called a wildfire prepared home. That term comes from the Insurance Business and Home Safety Institute, which has been studying how wildfire impacts neighborhoods for the past 25 years. This home is built with non-combustible materials. It has hardy board siding. It has a metal fence attached. It has a perimeter around the house of concrete. And it has some plants, but they're 5 feet or more from the house. So let's look what happens here. This demonstration was done at the Marin County Fairgrounds during the Ember Stomp Festival that happened last September. You're going to see our firefighters sort of igniting the fire in the foreground. And then we have some fans that are mimicking those strong wind conditions that we see on red flag warning days when wildfire is at risk from spreading and becoming dangerous. So it's pretty dramatic, especially sped up like this, but that is about 20 minutes of time condensed into 30 seconds. So I hope this sort of demonstrate how quickly conditions on the ground can change if there was an ignition right beside your home. So we're talking about defensible space. I like to kind of ground people in the wildfire behavior triangle, which is fuel, weather, and topography. Out of those three items, what can we control? We can't control the weather. The weather's going to do what it has to do, especially during the summer when there's those dry conditions, maybe long periods of drought and warm winds. We can't control the topography. You can choose where you live, perhaps, but you're going to get what you get in terms of the slope and aspect of where you live. So what you can control is the fuel. This photo on the right is a home. It's actually in upstate Washington. There's fire all around it. You can see it's sort of in maybe a mid slope. And this home created enough defensible space that it did survive the fire. So keep those three in the back of your mind, but know that fuel is the only one that you're going to be able to control on your property. This is an image from CAL FIRE. It sort of shows the defensible space zones. Let's take a look at the bottom left-hand corner. You see 0, it's right on the roof. 0 is zone 0, and it includes the home. So it includes all of the home hardening kind of concepts that I just touched on. And if you want to learn more, please visit our website. We have a lot of more research on those. It also includes the deck. So zone 0 starts from the home siding or the deck and works 5 feet out. So it's a significantly small number, 5 feet, but it actually has a huge impact on whether that house ignites or not. Moving away from out from zone 0 is zone 1. That's going to be 5 feet to 30 feet. And this might be the kind of where the brunt of your landscaping is, depending on the size of your lot. And then zone 2 is 30 feet to 100 feet. So if you have a large property, you may have that 100 feet of space. It might overlap with your neighbors. In most cases, I know here in Marin, that's usually the case. So we always encourage neighbors who live in a wildfire-prone area to sort of start communicating and talking about what they're both doing on their properties to have this shared sense of safety. Zone 3, you'll only see it in the bottom corner. That includes the driveway and the access routes. Here in Marin, maybe where you live too, homeowners are responsible for the vegetation on their street, basically, if their parcel is touching the street. And that is especially important for fire engines, which are big and tall. And if they're going to get up to those windy streets, they don't want to run into an overhanging branch or anything that might damage the engine or impede an evacuation response or even just an ambulance call to that neighborhood. Zone 4 is 100 feet and beyond. We will not be talking about that today, but if you have other questions or you have a lot of land, please consult that with your fire department. So zone 0, it's kind of been in the news recently. Gavin Newsom is expecting to create an executive order on zone 0 to encourage homeowners who live in wildfire-prone areas to remove combustibles 5 feet from the home. This can be kind of shocking. A lot of us are used to seeing foundational plantings. But in this scenario, there's nothing, no plants. What this could look like is kind of a combination of gravel, pavers, stone, even bare mineral soil will not be it's not an ignition point for those embers. As I mentioned, they're hitting the wall, they're falling to the ground. So you don't want anything to kind of be kindling for those embers, which are collecting at the base of the walls. This includes moving all of any sort of patio furniture, wicker furniture, for example, or if you keep a couch on your outside during the summer, firewood, storage, any sort of decor that looks like you would want to start a campfire with it, you're going to want to move that 5 feet out from the house. This also includes paying attention to leaves and debris from collecting on the roof or maybe the gutter or even potentially below the deck. Anywhere where a wind can blow a leaf is where wind can blow an ember. So being mindful of that very vulnerable 5 feet next to the house is what we're trying to get people to do. So just to reiterate for zone 0, it is a 5-foot non-combustible perimeter. Fully mature trees can be allowed in the space if they are properly cared for and pruned away from the roof and away from maybe underneath the eaves of your home. And then, of course, if you do have a fully mature tree, just being mindful of any leaves or needles that could be collecting around the base of the tree or on the roof. I've included potted plants in here. It says subject to change because we just don't know what the executive order coming down from the California Board of Forestry and Fire Protection is going to say about potted plants. In my experience, potted plants, they can be moved. They can be moved 5 feet further away from that, from next to your home. So as long as you think your plant isn't a huge threat, it's not one of the hazardous plants that we'll talk to you later. It's sort of a yeah, you make your best judgment with keeping potted plants in this zone. And then gates, decks, and other attachments is another issue that we can sort of think about in terms of our home includes our deck and our gates. So if you have landscaping right next to, for example, your deck, is that deck going to ignite if that landscaping were to ignite? Because most of us have wooden decks and we want to resist kind of any small materials that could potentially ignite the deck, which could carry fire to the home. I know these concepts are they get kind of tricky to explain, especially with so many people having a variety of different homes and fences. So I think I'll distill it down to if you do have a wooden fence on your property, focus your attention to the zone right where it attaches to the house. So 5 feet of metal fencing is sort of the ideal, most cost-effective thing to do if you're not going to replace the whole fence. Because a wooden fence can act like sort of a domino effect if it were to catch at a different point in the property. And you don't want to have that pathway leading right to your home. So many households have like perimeter fences. They might attach between different houses. And if your only point of control is that 5 feet where it attaches to your house and it's wooden, either replace it with metal or if there's a gate there, open it. So if you are evacuating, open that gate so that there's not that continuation to the home. So moving out from zone 0, we have zone 1. This is kind of be where the bulk of your landscaping and gardening may happen. Here in this picture, we see this home has kind of gravel surrounding it. It has a nice stone pathway. It has like a retaining wall that looks like a riverbed, and the plants are relatively small, and there's some spacing. 5 to 30 feet, we don't want to see any hazardous plants. Hazardous plants, I'm going to talk about a few species, but hazardous plants can even include dead plants or plants that are really bushy with a lot of dry leaves kind of at the base. When we think about that ember broadcast onto your yard, you don't want to give them any place to land where they could quickly ignite and become a bigger fire. So incorporating hardscaping and sort of islands of plants, this just encourages some space. So if there was there a fire to ignite, it doesn't have an immediate path to grow into a larger fire. This includes like the concept of ladder fuels, which I do have a slide coming down, which will explain that better. But it just means if there were to be a fire, it doesn't have a chance to grow larger and get closer to your structure. In this space, you want to keep those plants irrigated and well maintained. You want your tree limbs pruned so that they aren't grazing the floor or the shrubbery beneath. And mulch can be used, but it has to be used kind of mindfully so that if you do opt for using a bark mulch, it's not a continuous pathway between all your plants in your yard if it were to ignite. So tree maintenance, absolutely. You can have trees in your zone 1. They just need to be well maintained and limbed off the ground. you want to incorporate sort of natural fire breaks, maybe like a dry riverbed, a pathway, even bare mineral soil, just to sort of spread open the space so that it's not abundant with fuel. And then being mindful of your plant selection so that you're not planting hazardous plants in there, which we'll get to in a moment. So I talked about bark mulch. A lot of avid gardeners love to use mulch for so many great reasons. And I think it can be used in a way that is safe. There have been some studies that have shown that composted bark mulch, it holds more water, and if it does ignite, it doesn't produce tall flame lengths. The flame lengths are shorter and they're smoldering and they don't spread as quickly. So when you can use composted mulch, that is recommended. It can be found in certain nurseries, and I'm hoping that as this kind of information gets out there, more companies will invest in it so there will be more options. But if you are going to use organic mulch, sort of breaking it up between in those islands, as I said, and maybe putting a border of gravel or some stones, just so that it's not widespread across your front yard. When it's appropriate, gravel, of course, is going to be the best option because it does not ignite. And then the very worst option that we've seen is the shredded gorilla hair bark mulch, which, as you can imagine, if it's a hot, dry day in the dead of summer, that stuff is going to really respond well to an ember. It's going to ignite quickly and it's going to carry fire quickly. So if that's the only option, perhaps you're working on a slope, please use it far away from the home. Use it far away from an opportunity for it to climb into a tree canopy. Because that stuff really does ignite and loves fire. Any questions in the chat to be aware of, Jen?
No, I was just about to chime in on a couple of things. Like, I think as a designer, I know you and I were kind of talking before, that, everybody has plants around their house. It's a lot of plants to think about removing or whatnot. But I did like your pictures because it looked pretty. I mean, there's a way to do it so it still looks nice, and you don't necessarily need to have that vegetation right up against the house. So I did like those slides for sure. And then I was gonna say, sometimes when we're talking about bark and mulch, that gets confusing. So like bark is like the wood chunks.
Hmm.
This is how I would describe it. The bark is the wood chunks, and mulch is like kind of more like dirt. Like you can get like compost, and that can be like a mulch. Or we sell something called forest mulch, which has, like Jessamine was saying, it has the ability to retain moisture and keep weeds down and stuff like that, like the bark would, but it's more of like a dirt. So we're not having a bunch of that wood on the surface there that can help spread any fires, if that helps. So,
Yeah, that's a great point. Kind of the mulch you're describing, it has more organic matter. So it's just not as
mhm.
easy to ignite as, say, shredded bark mulch, which, on a dry day, you toss that into your campfire and you're ready to have s'mores. Um,
Totally. And I also like using the dry creek bed because that's just a nice sort of design, uh, you know, fun design element. And boulders, I'm on this boulder
mm,
kick where I'm just like, you know what, this needs a boulder. You don't have to water it. It takes up space. It can be used for, to help with that. So, I mean, just kind of thinking about it that way, I think is really helpful in terms of your garden design.
that's a great point. I think xeriscaping is the term, right? It's like low water use, lots of kind of more sculptural rock elements. And I think the future of California may look a lot like that. So I'm going to talk about ladder fuels. It's like a key term that's used in wildland firefighting. And if we take a look at this photo on the left, we do see some grass at the base of those trees, but all the trees are limbed up. Um, there's some continuous fuels, but they're on the ground. As soon as those fuels as soon as that fire starts to climb into the tree canopy, that is when we see much bigger flames and much more likelihood that those embers are going to catch the wind at the top of the tree and spread the fire even further. So reducing ladder fuels is sort of the most important concept I want you to take away. When you look out into your yard, do you see a ladder fuel? And if so, creating vertical and horizontal spacing is going to sort of reduce the risk there. And it's going to look different in terms of what plants you have and what sort of privacy you're trying to achieve. But even getting just a few feet of spacing between the lowest shrub and the lowest limb of the tree can make a difference. So zone 2, this is 30 to 100 feet. We're kind of creating more space between your trees if you have trees on the property, removing any of the dead litter and dead plants because those are primed for ignition from embers. If you have grasses, cutting the grasses so that they're not your 3 feet tall seasonal grasses. Grass fires are actually one of the quickest moving fires. They can be really deadly under the wrong conditions, and keeping the grass shorter, especially during the dead of summer and early fall when the wildfire risk is greatest, is going to be a really important thing to do. And keep in mind that if you do live on a slope, all of these things, and you need more, this much space and more, because as we saw in the last photo, imagine that yellow line is the slope of a hill. The fire is going to preheat everything above it and make it even more primed for ignition. So one of the sort of firefighting lookout sort of codes is if you're on a slope, you're kind of in a dangerous situation because fire loves to move uphill. So mowing your grasses, creating space between plants and shrubs, removing any downed dead wood. Sometimes like land managers will refer to this as a shaded fuel break. That means that the canopy of the trees is intact, creating shade, creating habitat, but there's not as much fuel to kind of have a very unsafe fire condition. You're reducing the fire intensity so that if there was a fire to spread, it wouldn't spread out of control, producing a ton of embers. It would sort of stay low onto the ground. And these are the sort of conditions that firefighters are using when they do prescribed burns. They want to keep the fire sort of maintained on the ground, get rid of any of the dead fuels on the ground, and it can move safely through that area, leaving kind of a healthy, more open structured forest environment where maybe some wildflowers grow back or some native shrubs. It can be very beneficial to the land. Of course, you don't want to have a prescribed burn on your property unless you have a lot of land and like to experiment with that. So kind of mimicking the same effects of a prescribed fire by just removing all the ground fuels, and opening up the floor so that there's not as much capacity for a fire to spread. So fire safe plants, I feel like this is the topic most people want answers on. They kind of want to be told what's safe to plant, what's not safe to plant. And there are a few plants that we know are hazardous. We know this mostly from lived experience of seeing these plants ignite. There hasn't been a ton of studies on what plants are safe to use. Most of what we know is because scientists have sort of looked at the chemical components of the plant, and they know from other studies that maybe certain chemical compositions are more prone to ignition while others take longer to ignite. So I think one key takeaway is that a plant's environment and maintenance generally have more influence on the flammability of the plant than does its characterization as fire safe or fire hazardous. Because all plants can burn, let's face it, but healthy plants burn less easily. Here's a great photo of a lovely community in San Diego, I believe. Everyone, you can see they're kind of homogeneous gardens with grasses and trees, but they're all well irrigated and well maintained, and the fire got to the edge of the property and stopped. So when we're looking at fire hazardous plants, you probably already are aware of a few species. The first one, we're going to talk about easily water-stressed species. I think I already mentioned your seasonal grasses, things that dry out as soon as the first warm day arrives. This also includes bamboo, which is a grass it's easy fluctuating between kind of moisture and dryness periods. Even throughout a warm day, it can kind of go back and forth. Your high oil and resin content species like Italian cypress and juniper, those are very combustible. Not only are they filled with sort of dead material on the inside of the plant, the oils that make it so fragrant when you crush the leaves, those oils can ignite very easily and produce flame lengths twice the size of the plant. So think of a beautiful Italian cypress like we see on the right. If that was on fire, it would be basically the size of a two-story building. Your invasive species, those plants, they grow prolifically because they must love it here, and that just creates a huge fuel load that, it's hard to maintain, it's hard to remove without, aggressive treatment. So those are another considered hazardous species. Dry, woody structured plants. So think of even like a really kind of decadent rosemary bush, right? Those can have a lot of dry twigs on the inside that if an ember were to land, it would kind of easily have a pathway to ignite the whole plant. And then your conifer species, same with the Italian cypress and juniper. If the leaves kind of smell good when you crush them, that's generally an indicator that they really respond well to fire. So if you do have lots of conifers on your property, I wouldn't say remove them entirely. I would say keep them limbed up, because if those lower limbs don't ignite, there's a good chance the whole tree could be saved from a wildfire. I added this slide this morning because I know we're all here from the Bay Area, and eucalyptus is sort of a hot point when we're talking about wildfire resilience. So this is a pretty clear picture. On the left, we see a very common site in the Bay Area, just a very kind of stringy, shredding eucalyptus species. Those are actually two colleagues of ours here in Marin who are thinking about removing these trees, and for good reason. There's a lot of dead material gathering at the base, and if an ember storm kind of ignited that, they would easily be able to ignite surrounding vegetation and eventually carry it to the canopy. However, on the left-hand side, or the other side, is a same eucalyptus species, but it's been well cared for. While it's easy to look at all eucalyptus and kind of paint a wide brush that these are all dangerous, I think the takeaway I'm trying to get is that they can be safely maintained. It's an expensive process, I'll give it that, but they're very expensive to remove as well. So instead of worrying about all eucalyptus, kind of look at the base of the tree and worry about the base of the tree, because that's where the ember is going to land and kind of cause the most problems. So fire safe plants or fire resistant plants are high moisture content plants, drought tolerant plants. And then when I say low and compact growth, that sort of just means smaller, maybe a little bit more tight, less likely to be sort of exposed to a lot of embers or kind of drying out on the center of the plant. And then low resin and oil content. And I'll share a few pictures of those. California natives are always a great choice. Knock wood that a fire never visits our lands, but if it did, those California native species have a lot of adaptations to wildfire and are likely to sort of resprout and provide habitat for sort of the pollinators and anything coming back after the fire. Deciduous trees with broad waxy leaves are generally more safe opposed to conifer species. A lot of our oak trees here in California have seen a lot of fire, and they can survive fire, especially if those limbs are the lowest limbs are limbed off the ground. Seasonal flowers, some herbs, these are all very moisture-rich plants that are just great options. They make our gardens look beautiful, and they're not considered hazardous. Succulents and cacti seem like an obvious choice. Of course, they are very moisture loving and drought tolerant. And then even irrigated lawns. If you have a green lawn, it's not going to ignite as easily. It might not ignite at all under those conditions because it is green and lush and short. But if you're not into having green lawns, maybe a native grass lawn, those can also be considered safe and well maintained, especially if they do get a little big, you want to keep them spaced out. And then fruiting trees and vegetable gardens, because actively growing plants that are producing fruit and vegetables, those are also very moisture rich. And it implies that you are in your garden daily, kind of checking on things, removing dead material, and caring for the land. So it's less likely to ignite. That's going to wrap it up for me. Of course, we only scratched the surface in terms of what we can all do for Wildfire Awareness Month. I would say if you're overwhelmed by this material and you're looking at your home and you're wondering where to start, start at that zone zero. I know it can be kind of daunting task if you have a lot of plants immediately next to your home, but if you're worried about wildfire, which I'm sure you might be, which is why you joined us this morning, that zone zero is sort of where all of the science comes together, and it includes looking at your home vents, the siding material itself, and anywhere a fire could land and potentially become a bigger fire. So if you do have questions, feel free to email me. I left my email at the front of the slide deck, but it's info@Firesafe Marin is our general email, and me, myself, or one of my colleagues would be happy to answer your questions. If you are joining me from anywhere in the Bay Area, though, and you have questions specific to your jurisdiction, contact your local fire department. A lot of fire departments are prioritizing prevention work right now, and they'd be happy to talk to you kind of about what your responsibility is in protecting not only your property from wildfire, but your neighbors. So May is Wildfire Awareness Month. It's a great time to sort of take stock of what you are doing or could be doing because we're here in California, we live with wildfire. It is a threat every month, but especially during the dry summer and early fall, that's when Northern California kind of sees the high riskiest weather for fire. So hope you all stay safe and let me know if there's any questions.
That was great. Thank you so much. That was a perfect just summary of, easy steps that we can take and different things to think about. Definitely, if anybody has any questions, feed them in. I had a couple comments that I wanted to say, and one was on how you mentioned watering drought tolerant plants. And I'm glad that you said that because I think, we, especially in the Bay, we have this, um, we're like we're traumatized by drought, I think, right? And so we're like, oh, save water, plant these drought tolerant plants, try to not use your water as much. But the thing is like, it's better to when you water, it's better to water less frequently but deeper. So even plants that are drought tolerant, getting out there, and especially through the summer months, I mean, as a designer, I mean, for clients, we would say have your irrigation on 3 times a week for 25 minutes. That's just kind of like a general rule in the hot summer months because you
Mhm.
want that vegetation to not be super dry. You want to encourage that root growth and stuff like that. And like to your point, you're saying that it's not as flammable when these things are hydrated and stuff. And then pruning too is I know from doing these classes, and I was talking with Jessamine that there's a little bit of a back and forth between like the fire safe people and the native plant people, because some native plants are on fire lists, like do not plant lists, but a lot of it just comes down to pruning and just
Yeah.
making sure that you're keeping that woody growth under control. And so it's fresh green growth and whatnot. So I think that that's something important to just keep in mind as you're maintain. It's a maintenance thing. It's like you're maintaining it, right? And then the other thing I was going to bring up was price per square foot, because there was a comment about, like gravel can get expensive and stuff like
Mhm.
that. And so what I would say is definitely, designing your garden is like designing your home, where you do have to consider price per square foot. And um, I would totally check into, there's definitely, I mean, people are constantly doing renovations to their garden just like they are for their home. So there's people giving away pavers, people giving, I actually had a client who had concrete patio that they wanted to reduce the size, and then they ended up breaking up the concrete chunks and using it as a retaining wall. So you can also think about sort of repurposing materials that you have or on hand to reduce that price per square foot. And then you can also, like Jessamine was saying, you don't have to have a whole yard full of stone. I mean, you can create that dry creek bed or that accent or something that just makes it a little bit more of a feature instead of just like, all over the place. But at least you still get that fire break. And it's also, it's like a design element too. So I think that that's some ways to help with that.
I love those ideas. I do think it's a lot of what I see in Marin. A lot of people have sort of cultivated these very English gardens, which look beautiful, but they take so much work and a lot of water. So I think I hope to see in the trend, like we're entering a drier climate, and we already know that, especially here in the Bay Area, it's a Mediterranean climate. So leaning into the succulents, your olive trees, your trees that are sort of more resistant to droughts, and species that are sort of more robust for our conditions here, not only could save you money in the long term, but could be the potential ticket to saving your home in case of a wildfire. So
Mhm.
it is kind of a cultural shift, and people are resistant and they have their reasons. I absolutely understand. From my perspective, I know that insurance agencies are kind of cracking down, and they're going to be sort of the driver for a lot of these changes for homeowners, which is frustrating in so many ways. But if these adaptations make communities safer, we're going to notice it. You can put a lot
Mhm.
of time into your garden and even your home, but if a fire comes through, all of that work could be gone in a matter of minutes. So
Mhm.
um, it does
Yeah,
take a
absolutely.
community to sort of make the trend, but I do see it happening, and I think having these conversations like we are today is part of that movement.